name's Keith Perkins. I started screen printing in high school in the early 80s, and I'm only 29, so don't do the math. Doing our own concert t-shirts. We would print a t-shirt and wear it to the concert, and everybody's like, hey, that's cool, where'd you get that? We made it. So that's what enticed me to dig a little bit. Coming out of tech school in the mid-80s, I was printing bird feed bags with water base. So I realized that it's a pretty cool thing. You know, screen printing as a whole. Everybody in here, is there anybody in here that does anything other than t-shirts or garment? Like yard signs or automotive glass or circuit boards or any of that cool stuff? Just so you know, screen printing as a whole, everything in your car, truck is screen printed. The rear window defrogger is screen printed, just like a t-shirt. They screen print that silver conductive OE material. They plug it in the lead when they build cars. You hit that button, it runs electricity through those lines. It heats up, and that's what melts the ice. Every cell phone, it's got a piece of our mesh in there to filter out the, looks like my time is cut short on that. If anybody's got any questions about some of the other segments, hit me up. I'll be here all day. Okay.
He's going to get you a mouse. But
okay.
Just tell me when to go. I'll stand back here.
Okay, we're going to start. So, again, Saati is the emulsion manufacturer. And again, stop me, raise your hand. There's only 35 slides here, and I got a couple hours to kill. So, important factors with this is screen making is your mesh choice, the preparation, the proper emulsion, coating procedure, and coating exposure. So when we talk about emulsions, we, as an example, we manufacture about 80 some different emulsions. So when somebody calls me and says, I want the pink one, we've got 18, which one? Be a little more specific. Emulsions are either water resistant or solvent resistant, or I'm sure some of you heard about dual cures. They're a little of each. The diazo emulsions are the ones you put the water in the diazo, shake it up and stir and mix. Those are essential to the type of exposure unit you're going to have. And we're going to dig into some of that in a little bit, and there are a couple slides here that's probably going to give you a headache. I'll do my best to describe them and help you understand, but there's a reason why there's so many different emulsions.
Should be able to control it with that. No? All right. Did my best. We're good.
All right. So, again, as we dig into this a little deeper, we're going to get into actually and I want you to focus on the type of exposure unit you guys have, what you're trying to print, the substrate and the inks, because that's what helps me determine which emulsion to put in your shop. So one emulsion that works here may not work there. And it really is relative to the exposure unit and what type of inks you're playing. Okay. The mesh count, it's important to reproduce the detail on the film positives. And the smallest detail that you're trying to print requires 2 threads and 2 mesh openings to be able to hold all of that detail. So if you guys have ever tried to reproduce a piece of art and you just couldn't hold all that fine detail, more than likely you've chosen the wrong mesh count. So, and again, these are guides. So, as an example, a 50 dots per inch or lines per inch image must be printed on a 200 mesh or higher. And a quick piece of math for you guys, if you take your line count, like 55 line, times 4.1, it's going to give you a recommended mesh count of 280. Actually, it's like 267, but you want, if you're having difficulty holding that job, that art, you can do some quick math to help yourself understand, are you using the right mesh count? So the lower mesh counts results in significant loss in detail, like the 110. It's typically white mesh. You can't run a 55 line halftone on that and hold all the detail. And it all is relative to going back to the math. Here's some decent examples. Your film positive, this is a representation of the stencil. And I'm sorry for you guys in the back that can't see this. I'll hold it up here in a minute. This is what you're going to get left with as far as your print. Hey, we're talking about some of the limit. Is that the same slide?
So just there, left and right arrow?
Yeah.
And what they see is what you see.
I was going down.
So left arrow or right arrow.
Just next slide.
Okay, here's a good example of poor print quality because we don't have the two openings and proper mesh counts. Sorry, guys. So the dot loss and interference here is strictly due to the mesh interference. Questions on this?
Hey, can you run that math again? What was that?
When you know your halftone, your dots per inch, somebody get out the calculator or your phone. So you're going to take 3.9. You always want to start with an odd number. I use 4.1 because it's a little more solid to me. Take the 55 line times 4.1. It's going to give you that 266, 267. There really isn't a mesh count, so go up to like 280, and you should be okay to hit that and not cause a moray. When you don't choose the proper mesh count on a halftone, you get that funny little pattern in there. That's called a moray, and that's typically straight out the wrong mesh count. You go up in mesh count, that'll go away. Answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? So here's a 10% dot, 80% reversed out. This is the representation you're going to get. Obviously, this dot is not going to reproduce what you guys want, the quality. And choosing the right mesh count for the halftones is all about the quality. And you can make, this is all about science. You can make this as complicated or as basic as you want. You see the poor dot representation. And I've got some other photos and things I'll share with you guys as you come up and see some of the QC tools in a little bit. Thread diameters. This is what a lot of people that, when you guys purchase your screens, and I'm not really familiar with some of the Canadian screen stretchers, but you tell them you want a 230, what thread diameter? It's very important to understand your mesh thoroughly. So as an example, and I'll get into this, but a 230 there's a plain weave and there's a twill weave. There's a 40 thread, a 48 thread. Obviously the lower the mesh count, the thinner the thread. It's vulnerable to ripping. It's very delicate. So here's a 305/31, a 305/34, and a 305/40. So if you can imagine the 40 thread being thick, the next representation is going to be a little thinner, and then the thin thread. You're going to see some thin thread this week, and that may be new to you, but some of the guys that's been printing a while and doing some water-based, getting into the hydro, it's really cool stuff, but it's not as durable as the 40 thread. You can see the percentage of open image area is what we call this area. That's what, as far as the channel, allows the ink to flow. So in the mesh count 61 to 508, you might find different threads and diameters to choose from. It's important when you order screens from your screen guy to know what thread diameter he's giving you, if for nothing else, to educate yourself and your employees. Here we go, the thin threads. They achieve phenomenal detail and vibrant colors. Chris from Nortech will get into some of this later today, but it is revolutionary to our industry, but again, it's very delicate to play with. And that thin thread, it's typically what all the water-based guys are using because it doesn't dry in the screen. This is going to get a little complicated here, but this is our mesh count. Here's the different thread diameters. This is that mesh opening where your ink actually flows through. This is the fabric thickness. And we measure fabric thickness with an electronic stencil thickness gauge. This will measure the thickness of the fabric and the thickness of the emulsion. So what you're getting at and what you need to know is that percentage of open image area that I showed you on that last slide. That's what's going to give you the ink deposit. So when people are always struggling and looking for a new white ink, I need a better white ink. Chances are you don't need a better white ink. You need more percentage of open image area and a thicker stencil. That'll give you better opacity on those dark garments. And the last one, which is not talked about a lot, but that's the theoretical ink deposit. So if I'm running the 305/31, notice that my ink deposit, my theoretical, is 19 micron. And you'll notice the thicker the thread goes up, how much less ink deposit is going to be applied. Questions on that? This is a great chart that probably Chris uses a lot when people call in and try to order, but this gives you an idea of High-Tex is our standard mesh. And this is the hydro. So if you look over, the thread diameter goes from 100 micron to 70 micron. We're just going to look at the top one as an example. The fabric thickness, the percentage of open image area, the theoretical ink deposit, and take a look at the tensions. So that 81 mesh, 100 micron, can be stretched to 35 or 40 newtons. You drop down to a thin thread, and I can only achieve 24 to 26. So understand that although the benefits of that thin thread are awesome, you got to be careful. Does anybody in here stretch their own screens? Cool. If you went to thin thread and you didn't tell your guy, hey, this is different, he's going to blow every one of them. And it's crucial that you have this chart, and we have them available. You can print it out and make sure whoever's stretching screens understands what mesh count and what thread it is, because there's a tolerance. Now, if I stretch this 81-100 to these specs, this doesn't compute. You've got it. We recommend the proper tension for a reason, because we've standardized. We know the tension, we know the fabric thickness, we know the ink deposit you're going to get. Questions? Mesh preparation. How many, by show of hands, actually use a degreaser or a mesh prep? Impressive. That's one of the harder products for us to go out and demo and sell unless you understand the benefits of that product. So mesh in itself is an inert plastic. Poor adhesion properties if you don't degrease. So I'm going to ad-lib here a little bit. So mesh is like plastic, emulsion's like water-based. It's typically 60 to 70% water. How do you get water to stick to plastic? You don't, not very easily. So that's where degreasing or a good mesh prep comes in your favor. So when you use a proper mesh count, it's going to take all the oils and greases and debris and so forth off the mesh and allow that emulsion not just to marry and dry, but to bond. A good mesh prep will increase the adhesion level by 20-25%. So when we're doing water-based and discharge, like we're going to do today and tomorrow, it is extremely important. Prepping the mesh for the emulsion to adhere properly is the most important step of printing water-based. If you're going to attempt to do water-based at your shop and you don't bring in a good mesh prep, chances are that those screens are going to break down on the press within 20 to 50 strokes. And you're not going to get the job off. By the time you sample and set up and register everything, it's going to be breaking down on you. So this is very important. Yeah, I kind of said that. So this is something we used to do in the 80s and 90s. We took an abrader. Abraders is trying to think. It's like pumice. It kind of scratches the mesh. You'll see this. That helps the emulsion bite and bond. The technology in the mesh is so much better in the last 10, 15 years that abrasion is not really needed like it used to be. As anything, the technology of everything is improving and improving. And so I use a liquid mesh prep now. I very, very rarely will use an abrader unless it's a 10, 20,000 piece run. And I really want to rough up the mesh a little bit to get that emulsion to stick a little better. So as I shared with you earlier, the emulsions need this. They need that mesh prep or the abrader to properly bond and give you that durability going to press. Questions on mesh prep? Anybody in here using a abrader?
How do you apply it?
So a abrader's like a viscous, it's like hand cleaner. You guys have seen the hand cleaner with that pumice in there. It's kind of That's what a braiders like. And you put a dollop, like Cool Whip or on pie or something, on the screen, and you work it in circles with a brush, both sides, and then you rinse it off thoroughly. And again, I don't see the need for that with today's quality and technology in the mesh, but we do use it occasionally. And the liquids are the same way. We apply it to a wet screen, work it in, let it sit 1 minute, and we low pressure rinse mesh prep. We do not high pressure rinse that. This is a great slide to explain and show you what a good mesh prep will do. So in this slide, we purposely used mesh prep and didn't use mesh prep. We took a calculator on there and we purposely underexposed this. And it'll show you that because we use mesh prep on this particular side here, it held the dots. Graphic guys that's doing a lot of point of purchase, window clean things you're seeing hanging in Wendy's, at the mall, at Macy's, Learners, Abercrombie, they do those they call it POP, point of purchase. Those are graphics guys and they're printing UV inks. They all purposely underexpose the screen because they're trying to hold an 85 line dot on a 380 or 420 mesh. So the mesh prep in their particular case is essential. But if you underexpose, as they typically do, obviously the emulsion's going to fall out. So in the textile segment, it's not a good idea to underexpose. And I'm going to do my best to get one of these in everybody's hands. It's an exposure calculator. If you don't know the proper exposure of each mesh count in your shop, that's your homework assignment. Go back and learn what you don't know. This is all about we don't know what we don't know. So, good slide on mesh prep there. So emulsions, I kind of touched base on this when we started. Not all emulsion for textile will do water-based and discharge. There has to be some key components and ingredients in that to make it a little water resistant and a little solvent resistant, because Jesse from Matsui will get into some of this. The discharge inks have a little bit of solvent in them. So if you're running a water resistant emulsion and you're like, hey, I'm going to try discharge today, that screen's going to break down very fast. So it is essential to understand why there's so many different emulsions. The quality of the stencil. Stencil is your emulsion. The thickness. After you make the design, some of the words and terminology may be a little new to some of you, but this is the stencil. For some of you that may have not heard that terminology before. So emulsions, as I said earlier, diazo emulsions are either water resistant or solvent resistant. Then there's a dual cure that's a little of both, and those all you mix. Then there's pure photopolymer emulsions. That's what we call those that come right out of the bucket in the coater on the screen. When you don't mix the emulsion, that is a pure photopolymer. Some people call it SBQ for short. That's what everybody wants because it's super fast exposing, it's a thicker stencil, and there's a 2-year shelf life on those. So everybody wants that super fast, easy reclaim, thick stencil, 2-year shelf life. When you mix emulsion, you've got about 6 to 8 week window opportunity for it to be good. Show of hands, who uses a diazo emulsion? 5 or 6. We're going to get into the proper exposure unit that's in your shop that will actually tell you which emulsion you should use. So, everybody wants a high solid emulsion, as we talked, in order to coat the variety of mesh counts, anywhere from 36 to 355. Those emulsions that we don't mix, that I call pure photopolymers, those are all generally 40 to 50% solids. What does that mean? When you coat the screens and they dry overnight, it's drying, but the other 50% of that is all water, and that's what evaporates out and gives you what's left. Okay? Questions on that? So the water-resistant emulsions are generally much thinner. So when you get into the water-resistant only emulsions, the diazos, most of those generally aren't solvent-resistant. So, and by example, if you have a water-resistant emulsion only and you put it on the press and you're trying to do a color change and somebody decides to use screen opener, you know, the gasoline in a can, that will lock that emulsion up because the emulsion itself is not solvent-resistant. So when we talk about emulsions that solvent-resistant, water-resistant, it's important to know what you have in your shop to know what chemicals not to put on that screen. Anybody have a question about the water-resistant or solvent-resistant? Yes. Great question. She asked, what's the benefit of using diazo? So, as an example, this particular emulsion that you're going to see in the next couple of days is a pure photopolymer. This is called PHUHR. When I was planning my trip to come up here on Monday, I realized what type of exposure unit they have back here, which is an M&R Starlight. Great piece of equipment, but they're super fast. This emulsion is too fast for that machine. And I knew we had a lot of details, so I brought diazo with me in my checked luggage so that I could add a little bit to this emulsion. The benefit to that was resolution and detail. So when you add diazo to emulsion, it slows the exposure down, allowing you to hold a crisper, cleaner edge and detail and resolution. So that's a great question. We'll probably get into that a little bit. I didn't have to use diazo on this particular emulsion with the designs, but I probably wouldn't have held the detail. Because that exposure unit is this far from the screen, it's super fast. And I knew I needed to slow it down a little bit so that I could not look like I don't know what I'm doing. So, questions? Yeah.
You were putting diazo into, we use trifecta at my shop. You can just put diazo into the BBQ, a ready to use to slow it down?
Yep, that's exactly what I did here.
Interesting.
So, with diazo emulsions or dual cures, the dio is 100% necessary. It doesn't work without it. With pure photopolymers, SBQ, you don't have to use the diazo. However, I did because of the detail and the equipment that I had to use. I was a little worried, and it's okay to slow things down, but it's very difficult to speed things up. Yes, sir.
Does that kill the shelf life of it or no?
Certainly does.
It does, yeah.
So, and since we're on diazo, the particular diazo I used in this 8-ounce bottle was only 3 grams. And this is probably getting a little off track here, but a standard gallon of emulsion that is diazo based, they're normally 12 to 14 grams. It would slow that emulsion down drastically. So I used 3 grams instead of 12 to slow it down just a little bit. Follow me?
Yeah.
So that's called diazo 11. A full-blown, what we call full-blown dose is diazo 1. And it'll slow, as an example, this is a 157 hydro. This in there on an exposure unit without diazo would probably expose in 18 to 20 seconds because it's got a pretty thick EOM. When I put diazo in there, I shot that at 40 seconds. So I went from 20 to 40. Yeah. So the art of screen making, which I've done for over 3 decades, is science. It's an art. And understanding all these variables can really make your head spin, but it's good to know what you can do should you have that one job that comes along once or twice a year, like, man, I really struggled with holding the detail last time. Hey, let's try a little bit of diazo. And it would work with the trifecta. This is the trifecta's competition, this emulsion. It's still a great product, it really is. Any questions on the diazo? We kind of got off track, but that's exactly what I want to happen. So great questions. So this is the wish list. When you guys call and You just want to change emulsions because just things aren't working out, and I don't know why. Every emulsion out there will work, mind you. I think, I got to say Saati's the best, but no. But they all will work if you do your homework and prep that mesh, coat it properly, figure out the exposure. This is the key to the exposure, this little strip. So we'll get into that in a second. But when you call up one another emulsion, everybody wants, oh, I'm sorry, wrong slide. So when we're talking about diazo water-resistant emulsions only, here's a couple of choices. We have one called DW. This means diazo water-resistant. Yolano, it's what I used in the early 80s. 925 WR. WR is water-resistant. So all the letters on your bucket of emulsion, when you get from Saati, they mean something, although you probably would never find out unless you asked. Chromoline, they have a CP Tex, which is water-resistant. And we actually own this company now, and I have no idea what CP means. Probably the initials of the founder. So I'm not sure what's down here. So what's the problem with diazo emulsions? They're super thin. They're generally 34 to 36% solid, which means 67% is all water. They're slow. They can be locked up with solvents. You take a water-resistant emulsion out there, whether it's the screen opener or somebody uses mineral spirits, a little lacquer thinner, Barsol, lacquer thinner, MEK. They will all lock that emulsion up and make it permanent. The easiest way to get that out is to take a razor and just cut that mesh out because that's the damage it does. Questions on water-resistant characteristics? The dual cure, as I said earlier. This is our HU42. RB is stocking this product. It is an amazing dual cure that has something called slipstick in it, meaning if I pulled the squeegee down hard on HU42, it will glide across that emulsion and not chatter. It's called slipstick, but it really helps reduce the friction and the static while you're printing. Yolano TLX, they have an RLX. Those are good dual cures. And the Chromoline, the UDCHV, now this is high viscosity, but it matches the solid content of the HU42. These dual cures, as I said earlier, they're a little bit water resistant and they're a little bit solvent resistant. It's about 50-50. These particular emulsions are the product of choice if you have a fluorescent exposure unit, a quartz, or a halogen. Show of hands, who has one of those? It's unfortunate, but that's the proper emulsion for you guys, not the pure photopolymer. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Excuse me. Because of these require that full-blown diazo that I was talking about. They hold extremely great detail, dual cures, and water resistant. They're really the product of choice. Every graphics guy that's doing an 65, 85 line halftone, this is what they're using. And the exposures, it's okay. But if you have that unit that we just talked about, you're kind of cuffed. So the pure photopolymer dual cure, which is what this is, this emulsion is water resistant and solvent resistant as a pure photopolymer. So in a sense, they call them hybrid. It's honestly a dual cure pure photopolymer because it's a little both. This is not your average pure photopolymer like Chromo Blue that's out there, or the CTR, or the Yolano Blue, or QTX, or our Saati PV. Those are pretty typical in the market, but they're not solvent resistant and water resistant. They lean towards the water resistancy only. And this technology is, it's come around, the trifecta is like this. meaning a little both. This is where the industry's brought us. So it talks about some of the ingredients and the additional curable additives to the SBQ that makes it that dual cure and water resistant. Here's where we talk about we can add diazos to those emulsions to make them a dual cure. And again, you got choices on how much diazo. If you're not running water basin discharge and you're doing a 45 line halftone, generally, there's probably no need to add diazo. And these have excellent solvent resistancy. And as you're going to see when they fire these presses up, they're extremely water resistant. And again, if you did the proper mesh prep and coated it properly, and I spent a couple hours on, I forget when I flew in, Thursday morning, just dialing in the exposure, because I had the mesh prep, I had the coating, but without the proper exposure, these screens will break down. So getting into that, we've been talking about this a little bit, but this is in order what you need to do to make the proper screens. The mesh prep, the coating, this is threads per inch. I don't know if I actually shared that with you earlier. That's also your mesh count. Like your 230, it's a 230, but it's also 230 holes per inch. If you guys never knew what the actual number of the mesh stood for, an 81 is 81 holes per inch, one square. We make mesh from 17 to 502. Imagine a mesh with 502 holes in 1 square inch. We don't sell a lot of that, but we do have it available. So when we get into coating sequence and different techniques, we could be coating them differently for special effects or puff or metallics or that base white, the flesh white. You need a little thicker stencil. And that's what gets into here. When we start talking about the calculator in a second, we're going to dig deep into this. And for every shop that's here, I hope to send a calculator home with you to let you do a little homework. But it's very important to figure out if you're exposing properly. So the mesh prep is one thing, the proper coating technique, and then the exposure. Every mesh count has a different exposure, technically. Most small shops are shooting everything at 30 seconds or 4 minutes, or everything, a 110 to a 230. And that's not proper. You can get away with it if you're just printing a little plastisol, but I will share with you later that there are consequences to that. And they're chuckling over here because they're probably back at the shop shooting everything at one exposure. No? As a screen maker of a long time, I just cringe when I walk in and say, hey, what's your exposure? 14. Okay, what about this mesh count? 14. What about this one? 14. Like, it's more common than what you would think. So with the hybrid emulsions like this, we treat this exposure calculator a little differently. Most emulsions, when you run this, you can take a garden hose and rinse that out. These hybrid emulsions require a little different process. I'm going to pass this around just so you guys can check it out. But this is a filtered Stouffer strip, and that's what they're talking about here to a solid 7 or 6 for direct to screen. You can pass that around. I'll give you one. So this is a filtered strip that we're talking about here. And with the hybrid emulsions, obviously you'll wet down the screen a while, and then we pressure wash this particular emulsion. Because of the components of the emulsion itself, they don't play well together if they're underexposed. And there's consequences in the reclaim if you do underexpose this. So this quality control tool, exposure calculator, is the most important tool to have in your screen room because you don't know what you don't know. You run this strip, take it back home and run on the mesh counts, you'll learn something. So this particular emulsion, we pressure wash, I was telling you, 12 to 18 inches, both sides. And show of hands real quick. Who would be a little scared to pressure wash the inside of their screen when they're developing? And there's a reason why. Because you're underexposed, you hit this with the pressure washer, the emulsion's gonna fall out. With these hybrid pure photopolymers, I was beating the crap out of this the other day. Pressure washing both sides 4 or 5 times because of the diazo, the proper exposure, and the detail. And some of them were pretty surprised, but if you do it correctly, you can do that.
But the key is the exposure unit, right? It's the spectrum. Of
We're going to get, in like 2 more slides, we're going to dig really deep into the spectrum of light. And it's going to give somebody a headache because it still does me. Question? So in talking about this, I touched base on a little bit. These PHU emulsions, and there's 6 different ones under that umbrella: PHU, PHU2, PHU-HR, PHU-DLE. So that's just the series of emulsions under that umbrella. But most of these are about 45% solids. They're excellent solvent water resistancy. They're pretty fast exposing. Good resolution. The diazo is better. And they can be post-exposed. And it's excellent with the direct-to-screen unit. Direct-to-screen being the M&R, the Exile, the Douthit, the Saati laser, etc. Those type of machines get exposed to a solid 6 on that strip. Traditional exposure units with glass and film acetates, you expose those to a solid 7. And all the math and all the directions are right here on the back. So you can pull this up on YouTube as well. This will be an excellent addition to your screen room if you've never played with one. So the HR, this is what this week is about. It's what I brought in. It's got the same qualities as the mother, which is standard PHU that comes in red or blue. The HR stands for high resolution. I just fogged over for a second. High resolution. It doesn't mean it's better than the other products. It's just a tick slower exposing to hold a crisper edge resolution detail. It's telling you that it's 25% slower than the other PHU. I think that's a little extreme, but it is a little slower. And here it talks about adding the diazo. But you add diazo, you also add about 20 to 30% more exposure. But the benefits are worth it. Anybody got any questions on? We're going to talk about some coating techniques. And this is actual mesh and some of the image around it. So the high solid emulsions, we tend to use the round edge of the coating trough on thicker emulsions like this because we can coat them 1-on-1. Is anybody in here using a sharp edge on the coating trough, or do you even know? A lot of coating troughs have a sharp edge on one side and a round on the other. They are technically for different types of applications. Water-based might use a sharper edge trough in 1-on-1 or 2-on-1. The round edge 1-on-1 is equal to the sharp edge 2-on-2. So if you're coating everything for days on end at 2-on-2 with a sharp edge, if you just flipped it over and went with the round edge, you can achieve the same, pretty close in thickness with the round edge 1-on-1. Questions on trough? And it's always, I'm still shocked. I was in Mexico a couple of years ago and they did 1,000 screens a day. Young lady over here coating screens, young gentleman over here coating screens, and the loading all day long. All they did was coat screens. The young lady was drying them properly, like this. The kid over here, he didn't know any better. They just told him to put the screens in and press the button. He was drying all the screens like this. This, if you're doing it this way, it is 100% wrong. If you ever forget, the screens in emulsion has to dry just like they set in the press. Mesh down. Why? Because the gravity, as it dries, kind of pulls to the bottom, and that's what gives you your stencil thickness. And you should be able to feel the stencil on the screen on the substrate side and not feel the emulsion thickness on the well side. Some people call this the squeegee side. Technically, they call this the well. Why? Because it holds ink, just like a water well holds water. This is called the substrate side because it touches your t-shirt. In the automotive, it might be glass. Glass is the substrate. Bottles, circuit boards. This side always touches the substrate. That's why they call it the substrate side. So substrate and well. You guys might hear, oh, that's the t-shirt side. It's still the same thing. We're out of time here. Perfect. So using the higher solid content emulsions, the round edge, dry and flat. There's another slide. Functions of a stencil. You're trying to reproduce the image from your acetate or off your direct-to-screen. It's saying be resistant to abrasion and the chemicals. As you guys are printing, the friction of the squeegee is abrasive to the stencil thickness, or to the stencil on the inside, and that's where you get some of your breakdown. Proper exposure, as we said on the previous slide, will help make that more durable. Okay? The function of the stencil is honestly just to reproduce what you're trying to sell the customer. That's all it is. This is where these next few slides can be a little confusing, but understand that this is the mesh, the blue area is the emulsion, and this is the channel or profile where your ink flows through. Okay? So if you want more ink, then you're going to build up the stencil to make this channel thicker and lay down more ink. So here's your t-shirt, your ink flow. This is gonna, I'm not gonna dig into this deep. You see this little monogram, the logo called RZ. What that means is how smooth is your emulsion. Graphics guys use this terminology a lot. T-shirt, hardly ever. But if you can't feel the stencil thickness on this side, chances are you have a really high RZ. RZ is when you can feel the mesh, kind of like rolling hills in the mountains. If that stencil thickener, if the stencil thickness and coating technique is proper, this substrate side should be as smooth as glass. And on the RZ meter, you'll be below 10. And that just helps, it literally just helps the quality of the print. The EOM, everybody understand what that means? Emulsion over mesh. So the thread thickness is one reading, and we're going to measure these and play with the quality control tools a little bit. But once you add the emulsion, that's what emulsion over mesh means. It's the change in thickness from the mesh to the emulsion. EOM is what you'll hear a lot. This gets into the RZ as I talked to you, and again, some of these slides are for the graphics guys, but if anybody's interested in seeing that, I'll be glad to show you. But if you're using that sharp edge, a couple of you guys were talking about, and doing a one-on-one to save on that gallon of emulsion because it's expensive, the quality of your prints is probably not up to standard. Here's the print quality of a low RZ. You can even see the knuckles of the mesh as it's woven. And it'll look like a spider. Very poor print quality. You notice how you see less? You see less of the emulsion? Can you guys still hear me in the back? You see less of the emulsion and a better quality print because it's a lower RZ. And again, for textile, you just want to make sure, if you don't have the gauges, which you probably won't, you always just want to run your hand across it. You should feel the thickness of emulsion, which will tell you your RZ is probably adequate. Here's the optimum. 10 to 20% of the fabric thickness. You see very low RZ, and very clean, crisp, sharp edges. This is where we're going to get into the lamps. This is the most crucial area for me when I'm talking on the phone or I'm going into a shop. It doesn't matter what kind of printing equipment you got. I want to know what kind of inks you're running, what substrates do you print, and what kind of exposure unit do you have in the back for me to play with, because it's the make or break. So the intensity of the lamp, the distance of the lamp to your screen is critical. A lot of people will tape it off. These new LEDs that are tabletop took all that away from us. But the mesh thickness, again, each mesh count's got a different exposure. The mesh color, white mesh, all mesh is made white. We dye it purposely yellow to slow it down to hold better detail. The coating thickness, so every one of these affects the exposure. So if you guys decide tomorrow to go from 1-in-1 to 2-in-1 or 3-in-2, you have to go and adjust the exposure, longer or shorter, whatever that may be. It's critical. And also the type of emulsion, like the diazo versus the pure photopolymer. Okay, I warned you about this one. This is showing you spectrum of light and what lamps put out at what output. So the top one is a mercury vapor, which honestly is probably not relevant in our industry much anymore. Then you're going to get into the metal halide, which is the king of light sources, the king. Then you'll get into multi-spectrum, and then fluorescence, and then down here is the white quartz. So as you see where they peak, emulsions thrive for that purple light, the purple hue. That's technically what exposes emulsion. White light is not good. You're not getting a full burn and cure. So it is critical, especially that you know what light source you have to what emulsion you choose. Because even though you don't know it, it's all relevant in there as to how good and reliable and durable on press it's going to be. Fluorescent is probably the lowest spectrum of light to halogen to quartz. Those are kind of on the bottom. They've all been relevant and worked for 50 years, but they've been kind of phasing those out. If you notice, most of the newer exposure units you go out and look, try to buy, they're LED. But even at LED, as you'll see in a second, LED is at 405 nanometers. These charts is all measured in nanometers. Nanometers is output is a measurement of output of spectrum of light. The reason why the fluorescent and quartz and halogen don't work so good and can't work properly on a pure photopolymer is because they don't have the spectrum of light. Everybody follow me? This kind of hurts sometimes, but however, the pure photopolymers, they demand 405. And if you try to use the pure photopolymer on the fluorescent or the quartz or halogen, you might expose it and print the shirts and sell the job, but the cause and effect is the reclaim. That emulsion is not going to reclaim properly if you're trying to use the pure photopolymer on that lower spectrum of light. They come out gummy, chunky, and stringy. Show of hands. Whose emulsion comes out like that in a reclaim? You guys familiar with it? A couple of you. It's a red flag. If your emulsion doesn't dissolve properly, then you're probably not exposing it properly or have the wrong lamp. And it's all fixable. And we get into the intensity of the lamps, and this is not going to be relevant to some, but I talked about the UV and the blue light is the best output at 405. Most of your LEDs that you buy are going to be at 405, and they're spec'd out that way on purpose. So a 5K lamp, which is metal halide, at 30 inches, it's putting out 1,230 microwatts. Again, this is science that I don't dig into this deep, but it gives you an indication of how far it drops off down to that fluorescent tubes. You guys see that? Not my favorite slides. So if you've got the proper exposure, a lot of times you can just flip the screen, both sides, it should be the same color. If your emulsion is much lighter or scummy on the inside, it's underexposed. And it's not going to be that durable on press, and it's probably going to reclaim a little funny. Okay? So that optimum exposure, you're going to have the same color, very even, and it's difficult to achieve with the wrong light source. Anybody ever see a very heavy deposit in the center of their screen? That's because the tension's weak, and when you go to coat it, it's weaker in the center. It's tighter on the sides, so it leaves it heavier. The only way to do that is to properly have them restretched or scrape that off. More pressure. So you can tell, obviously this is the image we're trying to print, and we're trying to get an even, clear edge. This next slide will be a little better. Let me go back. So achieving the proper exposure, we're talking about the distance of the lamp. You really, a lot of people used to say, corner to corner, this on a stand-up lamp, this is the distance you want from your lamp to your screen. With your LEDs, you don't have that. Does anybody have a freestanding metal halide lamp in here?
I have it, don't use it.
You don't use it?
No.
That thing's worth gold. But it's important to get the emulsion thickness properly, even across, and get the proper exposure. With all the dual cures, the guys adding diazo, those stand out clearly with color by flipping them front and back. The pure photopolymer is not as much, but as you're developing and rinse it out, I kind of do this as I'm rinsing out, and if I can get a little emulsion off of my fingers, it's underexposed. I used to do that when I didn't have one of these. Anybody have scum on the inside of the screen as they're developing and rinsing them out? Good answer. You wouldn't admit it if it was. I wouldn't. Now we're back to that calculator. This particular calculator is what I used back in the 80s, and it's only good with dual cure emulsions because you're looking at the color in here. And when you found the proper one, you would do the math, exposure times that number, and that was the adjustment to your exposure. Anybody ever seen one of these or used one of these? They do not work on pure photopolymers. All right, where's those calculators at? The strips still here? Who's got it? There's one. Everybody in the back see those? Okay, cool. Yep. So this is, as I shared with you guys earlier, this is the key. This little rascal is going to help you dial it in to where you're going to get more durability on the stencil, on press, and reclaim. Does anybody need to use the facilities? We're at an hour. We've got about 45 minutes left. Break? Go ahead. Let's just take 5 minutes. Employee took over coating, and speed and pressure when coating changes everything. You know, myself and any one of you coat the same screens, we're going to get a different stencil thickness. So it is very important to try to keep the same person coating screens or have a coating machine, because anybody can load the machine and press a button and get the same stencil thickness. So that was a good question. Somebody else talked about, I think it was Sean, wherever he's at. There he is. He is making some of his special effects inks and different things. He's got one of our lasers, but he's added emulsion to get a thicker deposit, and he had to change the exposure on that. So anytime you change the coating technique, it also changes the exposure. So it's be mindful that if you change anything at all, if you change emulsions from their red one to my red one, chances are the exposure is different, although they look exactly the same. Okay? That exposure calculator, I did find one in my, I'll pass this around. I've only got one. This is similar to the one that's on there, and you'll notice that, and don't take this out, please, but there's different filters, and they're sandwiched on the back. So we'll just pass this all around. That is the one that we talked about is good for dual cure emulsions. Not very widely used much anymore. Here it is. I'm going to do my best to put one of these in the hands of every shop. I've only brought 50, so if there are 4 of you here from one shop, I'm going to try to give everybody one. But this is the Bible. I used to say that a lot and got in trouble for it, but as long as you use this and dial it in to the best of your ability, it will give you a good, solid, hard stencil, and it's going to go to the press. You can run and do your job without screens breaking down. So this is the key. So if you purchase one QC tool for your screen room, it should be this. So this 21 step guide is a filtered strip. They call it a Stouffer scale. And we want it to rinse out from the bottom all the way up and stop all 4 corners of the 7. There's a couple other slides here. We know from the emulsions that is the sweet spot to exposure. A solid 6 or solid 5 is going to be vulnerable and subject to premature breakdown on the press. So on the back of this, there is directions. So if I did expose this to a solid 5, or let's say a solid 6, somebody get my calculator out because I didn't do too well in math. So let's say you expose for 23 seconds. And I only got a solid 6, meaning this rinsed out up to here. On the back of this is instructions to tell you take that 23 seconds, and I want to increase 1 step. I'm going to times that by 1.4. The correct exposure is 32. That's how easy it is to you. Now, let's take that same 23 seconds, and let's say I got a solid 8, meaning it stopped there. The bottom scale is going to tell you to take that 23 seconds times 0.70. The correct exposure would be 16. So when it comes to exposure, the math doesn't lie. And again, as I shared with you in the beginning, this can be very scientific and as detailed as you want it to be. You don't have to go that far, but this QC tool is a must. And I'll do my best to put one in everybody's hands. So that's how easy it is. Okay? If your screen's rinsed out a solid 8, then chances are you've lost some of the detail and resolution of that job. That's the negative side to overexposure. It doesn't hurt to reclaim, but overexposure, you're going to lose the dot and loss in the design you're trying to run. If it's on the 5 side or 6 side, chances are it's going to break down and not be as hard a stencil as you want. Everybody understand that? It's fairly simple, but it can be complicated. Maximum resolution, meaning the detail in some of the jobs. Show of hands, anybody do any 4-color process, sim process, really high end? This is where the rubber hits the road. When you're trying to get higher resolution, you'll want to use dyed mesh. You guys are probably already used to mesh being yellow. But as I said in the beginning, all mesh is woven and it's white. We purposely dye it for this particular reason, for resolution. So traditional screen making with the vacuum, it's very important to get the proper contact. And that's what they're talking about here. The dyed mesh, a good vacuum. This is 16 to 18 on your gauge. If anybody's pulling a vacuum, up to 22 is ideal. You'll get a perfect contact between the glass, your artwork, and the emulsion. And that's all relative to the resolution and detail. If you don't have a good vacuum, chances are that lamp is going to undercut that design, and it's going to come out a little funny and maybe sawtooth. Anybody ever heard that terminology of sawtooth? Generally, that's from a lack of emulsion when you coated the screens, because the lamp is going to expose, but the emulsion will rinse out, and it would rather follow the mesh pattern, and that's what gives you that sawtooth look. post-exposure. Anybody post-exposed screens in here? Post-exposure, what this means is, when I've coated the screens, when I've done the whole thing, I've stretched them, I degreased them, coated them, exposed them, I got the proper exposure. A post-exposure is when I put this back in the exposure unit, this side facing the lamp, don't pull a vacuum, and I post-expose. What that does for me is it makes it far more durable on press for that water basin discharge. I post-exposed every screen yesterday that they were going to run water basin discharge on today, because it just makes me sleep better. The last thing I want is screens to break down that I made in front of you. It's going to happen though. It's just there's some failure that we need to happen. So the post-exposure, if you're just running plastisol, there's really no benefit. Okay? And the post-exposure, contrary to some of my colleagues, want to do it 2 times, 3 times longer than the initial. So that 23 seconds we said earlier, some guys would just shoot them for, 60, 68, 69, 70 seconds. I personally go 6 to 8 times longer, because a post-exposure cannot hurt the reclaim. Underexposure does. Anybody in here use a hardener on their emulsion for that long water basin discharge job? Anybody know what hardener is? Hardener is a liquid product you would put on this to go to the press for a long job that's going to make it permanent. Then it requires a Stanley razor knife to take it out, which you really don't want to do. So post-exposure gives you that durability, especially for the water basin discharge, mainly discharge. Any questions on that?
Post-exposure be like environmental if you left the screen out under lighting, normal lighting conditions?
Already exposed or?
Yeah, already exposed.
No, it's not going to hurt anything.
But would it count as post-exposure?
No.
No. Because there's not enough UV light.
Right. The ambient, the output of these lamps doesn't do anything. Now it will skim, if you have a screen that you've coated and you didn't shoot it, you walked out here to talk to somebody and you set it down and kind of forgot, it's probably toast. And that's the negative aspect of these pure photopolymers that are so fast. That means they're sensitive, super sensitive. And you have to use those under proper light conditions. And proper lighting is a yellow light, ember, safe light. We actually make, well, we don't make. We got these cool glasses, I'll pass them around, that you can put on, and you will see the purple light in here. That's bad for emulsion. So these, I'll just pass them around. I wasn't going to get into it, but these help you understand what the emulsion sees and feels. Kind of cool.
Do you mind if I try it on?
Yeah, put them on. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? It's a great question. When I was in production, 85 to 97, I post-exposed everything, and I did it outside in the sun, leaning against the building. That's all I knew. But yes, the sun is probably the best possible post-exposure, as long as you're not in Canada in the winter. I mean, we seen sun yesterday, and some of the residents were freaking out. So yes, somebody else have another question? Yeah, and I. Yeah, now listen, if you're running plastisol and you're going to set up for 10,000 shirts, absolutely, post-expose it. Dual cures, the diazone mixing, there's no benefit to post-exposing those. Sorry. And I did it for 5 years. Nobody had ever told me. It wasn't until I went to work for the manufacturer I learned that something I was doing for years was completely irrelevant.
Does the thickness of the glass matter? I had to replace mine, and I'm just wondering if that...
We're a little offbeat, but his question was the thickness of his glass on his exposure, it doesn't matter. Absolutely it does. I broke a few pieces of glass in my day. Exposure manufacturers use something called optically clear glass. And it's very expensive. And it's tempered for a reason. But yes, it matters. The thicker the glass, the slower the exposure. The thinner, obviously the faster, but more vulnerable. Is there another question? What? I'm glad you picked up on that. She's like, well, no vacuum on the post-exposure. No, because number one, when I post-expose, I want to post-expose the well side, the squeegee side. And if I'm putting it in there like this and pull a vacuum, you're likely to break the glass. So put it in there and go 5-6 times longer than the initial and no vacuum.
My unit only works if the vacuum is on. Like it'll only run the exposure.
We have to sell you a new unit.
Yeah, I know. I figured that. Can I still do that like with it subspace side down? Will that still help me out?
Yeah, if you do it long enough.
Yeah. Okay.
So the problem with that is that light has got to go through. And honestly, we're trying to come out the other side.
Yeah.
Like a door song, breaking on through. Any other questions on that post-exposure?
Can I ask a different question? How's
No different question. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah. How's like laser exposure compared to metal halide? Because like the future is going to be laser, right?
Wow. Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
He asked metal halide, which is the king of lamps. LED is now more dominant and more demanding out there. You know, everybody's making LED because it's versatile. It'll do everything. The laser that he spoke about, I can let Sean come up and talk about that if he wants, but the laser that we sell, it's called LTS. And you can find it on YouTube all over the place, but it is lasers, 128 or 196, going across and exposing in a negative format, not positive, which is what everybody's used to seeing. Follow me? And it's 405 nanometers. And there's 196 of them. So after class, I'll teach you how to clean those, and you can go home with Sean. That's the only, the laser, you really should go through and clean those up once a quarter, or if you got a really clean room, maybe twice a year.